on a journey from conflict to peace, and it's the responsibility of all political leaders to help to complete that journey. But it's clearly not a task for a hurler on the ditch like the leader of Fianna Fáil. And I wish he would do everyone a service and for once engage positively on the North and on the necessary process in that area and across this island. Today, Taoiseach, I attended the funerals of Willie Lynch and Tara Gilbert, of their children Kelsey, Jodie and their unborn baby, and Jimmy Lynch, all victims of the fire that killed 10 citizens in the Travellers' halting site in Carrickmines. And there were, as you know, widespread expressions of sympathy after this, and that provided some hope that the treatment of travellers, not just in terms of housing, could begin to be addressed in a serious way. But unfortunately, that hope has been dented by the familiar negative attitudes as attempts were made to rehouse the families of the Carrickmines victims. And this underlines the need for a fundamental review of the treatment of travellers and the travellers community in Irish society. And I put it to you, Taoiseach, that this should be government-led. In the last 7 years, funding for traveller accommodation was cut by 93%. 1,536 families are in overcrowded or unsafe conditions. Many travellers have no access to basic facilities such as sanitation, water or electricity. They fare badly on all key indicators of disadvantage, including unemployment, poverty, health, infant mortality, life expectancy and education. And at the root of all of this is the prejudice, the discrimination and the social exclusion experienced by these citizens. And public representatives of political parties in this chamber have actually campaigned against the housing of traveller families in their constituencies. And you know I have raised this with you on a number of occasions. So, Taoiseach, would you consider establishing a state level with a northern appendix, a genuinely island-wide forum to be set up as a matter of great urgency, involving travellers, political parties, government, local authorities, health and education sectors and media organisations to make recommendations on how this major issue of inequality can be tackled and addressed?
Taoiseach. Thank you.
Well, first of all, our sympathies go to the families again. The national flag flies at half-mast on all public buildings today as a mark of sympathy and solidarity with the families who have lost their loved ones, all 10 adults and children and an unborn baby. Clearly the issue of traveller accommodation has been very much to the fore. An audit has now been carried out on all traveller halting sites throughout the country. Deputy Adams will be aware that accommodation is provided through a range of measures for traveller people. The standard local authority housing financed from the Department of the Environment, traveller-specific accommodation initiated by the Department, private housing assisted by the State, including local authorities or voluntary organisations, and through the travellers' own resources. I would say that the 2014 annual count of traveller families shows that of the 10,226 families that are accounted for here, the majority were accommodated in either standard social housing, 35%, private rented accommodation, 26%, assisted private housing, 5%, and were housed with their own resources, 6%. There were 13 in group housing, 9% in shared accommodation, 1% in transient sites, just 1%, and 4% were on unauthorised sites. Clearly it's an issue. I find, having dealt with areas of this over the years, that where communities are engaged with and have the situation explained to them, be it emergency or not, that there's generally, not in all cases by any means, a willingness to work with local authorities. You're aware, Deputy, that the Department and the Government will provide funding for traveller accommodation, but it's best delivered through the local authorities, where the local representatives know the local people and engage with the traveller families who may be accustomed or who have lived in a locality for quite a long time. The point that you raised about a cross-border issue, I don't think it's necessary to set up a new one here. I think the North-South Forum, the Ministerial Forum, could actually have fed into both sides the traveller accommodation personnel who would prepare a report for that. Maybe you don't agree, Deputy McLaughlin. I'm not sure that having another separate administrative operation is the way to go here. We have a system that does address a whole range of problems. I don't see why the Ceisteanna group or the traveller accommodation group groups down here couldn't work with their counterparts and feed in through the various ministers, local government, environment or whatever. And perhaps at the next meeting that we might have an item on the agenda dealing with this to see how that might proceed. Take the point about inequality and treatment of individuals who happen to be travellers, along with other groups that might be deemed to be fringe groups also. It's a serious challenge.
Deputy Adams.
With respect, Taoiseach, you don't take my point about inequality. These people are treated in a shameful way. Babies on the side of the road, no toilet facilities, no water, no beds, no prospects, no hope. That's how they're treated. And it's good that the flag is flying at half-mast. But this week, the Connors family will bury their loved ones. They'll bury Thomas and Sylvia and their children, Jim, Christy and Mary. And there's nowhere to live. The masses will be on Thursday. The burials will be on Friday. They'll still be homeless. Now, that's our responsibility. There is a time, and you've done this in the past on other issues, where you have shown leadership. As Taoiseach, you've stood up and you've said, this is what we need to do. So our society cannot be defined by the treatment of these citizens. The talks with residents at Rockville Drive continue without resolution 10 days later. It's time for an intervention. These families will only start to pick up the pieces when the funerals are finished. And they've still nowhere to go to try and heal themselves and to mourn their loved ones and to rebuild their lives. Now, I was suggesting a forum in this state. There isn't such a forum in this state. I was suggesting it be all Ireland because travelling people are nomadic. At least some of them are nomadic. In the north, they have the status of as an ethnic minority. And in England, Scotland and Wales, they have the same status, but not here. Now, I'm not suggesting that's the cure-all for all of these problems, but the Oireachtas Joint Committee on Justice and Equality made a number of recommendations which have still not been acted upon 18 months later. So I ask you, Taoiseach, to intervene on this issue.
Thank you.
As Taoiseach, to act on this issue. And I go back to what I was suggesting. Bring together whoever you think is appropriate. I've just made suggestions, but it clearly has to involve the travellers themselves, along with all the other responsible agencies, including the government.
Thank you.
To deal with what you said was an issue of inequality. Some good can come out of these 10 dreadful deaths. Some good can come out of it, but only if the government acts.
Well, it won't bring back any of those who lost their lives. Obviously, I think a national audit now being carried out will bring its own revelations, I would expect. There has been a new body set up, housing approval body, which takes up operation shortly, called Ceisteanna. There is the fact that every local authority, as you know, has a 5-year rolling programme in terms of what it proposes to do about traveller accommodation, be it in social housing, be it in private rented housing, or be it in halting sites. There are the local traveller accommodation consultative committees in every local authority. They comprise of people who are elected by the people to discuss the question of traveller accommodation, traveller education, traveller social services and so on like that. They assist in the preparation of those 5-year programmes, which are to be set out and implemented by every local authority. There is the National Traveller Accommodation Consultative Committee. That committee is appointed by the Minister for the Environment under the Traveller Accommodation Act of 1998. It is an independent chair. It comprises representatives from the various departments, the City and County Management Association. It's a national platform for traveller accommodation consultation. It supports the local traveller accommodation committees. It commissions relevant research on traveller issues like you raise, and it provides an advisory role on national policy and strategy issues. And in respect, unfortunately, of the tragedy that occurred in Carrickmines, the the programme to review fire safety and traveller accommodation is always obviously of particular importance here. Some authorities have held initial meetings about that plan to prepare for the review or to take appropriate action to improve the position in halting sites or in other forms of traveller accommodation, and that's not yet finalised. So there is the national body here, but the point is, Deputy Adams, that while it's all very well to talk in here, it's to make the decisions that will allow for traveller accommodation to be provided that meets resistance. Now, I would have thought that following this horrific tragedy in Carrickmines, that where clearly the local authority wanted to put temporary accommodation for a 6-month period in a location close to where the site, the temporary halting site there for 8 years was and is, that would have been acceptable under the conditions set out. I regret that hasn't happened. Probably there are still discussions going on between the local authority and the people living there. Let me assure you that Minister Kelly has devoted a very considerable amount of time to trying to get closure on this, so that before these funerals would have taken place, that this matter might have been sorted out. Unfortunately, it hasn't. So it is a question, Deputy Adams, of being able to make decisions that will allow for appropriate accommodation with all of the necessary facilities to be provided for traveller people. They are, after all, of the same nationality as ourselves.
Thank you. Deputy Wallace.
Thank you, Conchola.